Light of the world or salt of the earth? Which one of the two would you describe the Catholic Church? Or using a more modern cultural jargon, how would you spiritually brand it? In our gospel, we hear Jesus continuing with last week's theme of describing how to live out discipleship. However, rather than starting from a position of apparent weakness, as he did in the Beatitudes, he shifts to more potent Christian metaphors, one that suggests mastery, the light of the world, the salt of the earth. As a light to the world, your moral actions would be a beacon to everyone else. Being the salt of the earth implies having a nobility born of honesty and humility. We have a deep interior knowing when we meet people like that. Well, recently I read an article by the Episcopalian priest and journalist Tish Harrison Warren about the dangers of personally branding ourselves. Given our techno-attached community's inclination for hyper-use of social media, people tend to present themselves as a brand rather than a person. Unfortunately, by doing so, Harrison claims that they lose their souls. A perfect example, I saw this on TV the other day, is when Jenna Bush Hager, who on her morning show recently asked her 5-year-old daughter how she felt after too much screen time. Her answer was, "Sad, Mommy." But why? We have the ability to paint our personalities and activities and relationships as well perfect and beautiful. Isn't that appealing? No, Warren says, and I wholeheartedly agree, doing that is performative, ingenuous, unauthentic. Every post is calculated to get the most likes. Even our politicians these days seem to be doing things to emphasize their personal appeal rather than their policies. Gaining notoriety has become more important than substance. Even when people post Bible verses with picturesque backgrounds and landscapes, sometimes they feel really contrived and sappy instead of inspirational. Content seems to be overcoming the actual vitality of living. Even last week, I got caught up in the social anxiety of it all. I was creating a website for a new ministry I was going to undertake, and I was almost obsessed to the point of being unable to make a decision about which photograph I should use on the first page. But then working on this homily, I realized it doesn't really matter. The people who get attended to in the ministry are the ones who need to be seen, not me and my cover art. And if they feel seen and tended to, they'll tell others through God's will and grace, not mine. I believe that Harrison's warning about the trend of social media eclipsing face-to-face interaction is very real and threatening in our society. It does violence to our personhood that includes everything we are, our weaknesses, our failures, and even our sinfulness. We desperately need to be loved for all of those things. They're part of our inherent value as human beings. We need embodied relationships with people we can hug and tend to when they're ill and show mercy to when they falter. Not automatons who never misstep. You need quiet beauty, nobility, enduring truth and love. Those things exist among the messiness of life. If it wasn't for the messiness of life, we wouldn't really recognize them. But they'll never be found through personal branding, and not by branding ourselves as Christians either. Going to church and not harming our family and friends doesn't really make us Christians, but doing the things we would rather not do or are more difficult to do, like forgiving those who hurt us, loving our enemies, donating a lot more of our wealth to charity. That's palpable and infectious, brilliant and inviting, light and salt. Jesus called Israel to be the salt of the earth and light to all nations, because that was always that nation's vocation, just as it is ours. At the time that he was speaking, though, the salt had lost its flavor and the light had turned in on itself. There was definitely a rebuke in Jesus's description. Jerusalem, that city on the hill, had become as unattractive as possible. It's as if Israel had surrounded itself by mirrors that were turning in on themselves and were using additives in their salt. Jerusalem's brand was being used to appear exclusive, the best, and to keep others in the darkness. Can you imagine that today? Mm-hmm. Yet, isn't that what happens with online branding culture? We try to portray our best and leave out the bad, saying that belongs to others. Jesus emphasized that keeping the Torah law was not the way to salvation. Only by having a right relationship with the Holy One would open the door to integration of one's heart and actions. The way of life he was advocating would lead to a totally different result than just being known as the best. Whether you're being drawn to the light of the world or the salt of the earth as a way to discipleship, it doesn't matter. There's many paths to integration, but it must include a relationship with Jesus to provide the alchemy to discover true holiness. In order to avoid a stale Christian identity, I think the lines of Isaiah today provide the best guidance. Share your bread with the hungry, shelter the homeless, clothe the naked, don't turn your back on the needy. Kindness in action, and not posting about it. Our vulnerability gets exposed at the Eucharist and the breaking open of the word. Those are the only brand marks we need to concern ourselves with. Then our light will shine, our work will satisfy. Amen.